Yes, I'm Abiola Farounbi. I'm a front-end developer. I'm also a technical writer from Lagos, Nigeria. I have great passion for building accessible and user-friendly web application. I love sharing technical content on my blog and also my website, which you could check out at www.abiolaesther.me, where I have all my links to all my related blog talks and have shared of recent. So, yeah. So let's get right into the talk today. So, what is web accessibility? Well, the concept of web accessibility has always been overlooked and highly not prioritized. A lot of people tend to overlook the talk and tend to just take it as less priority. But I feel it should be considered, it should be highly considered whenever we're building any web product at all. We should always make sure that we consider it as a vital concept in the building process. So in simple terms, web accessibility, it means making the web available and accessible to everyone. So to put it in a more accessible, in a more reachable meaning, making the web usable by everyone, making the web at the reach of everyone without any form of limits. The web should be accessible to everyone and to provide equal access to everyone so we can all experience the full benefit and capacity of the web. So it's important that we consider this. And one of the benefits you can greatly gain from making your web application accessible is that it improves your site's SEO because it makes it more reachable to all those who randomly search the internet. So people are able to access it more easily. And this makes it also easy to find in different search engines also. Okay, web accessibility principles. So according to the web content accessibility guidelines, they already set out 4 important principles that we have to consider when building for the web. And they are put out as 4, or you can just call it the POUR principles. So it's important that we consider these principles when setting out to build any web application. We consider P for perceivable. So in terms of you building your web application, it's important that you consider that the web application you're building is in a way that your users can interact and can identify the content using any part of any sense organs at all in terms of vision, touch, and hearing. So when we're talking about using screen readers to access your particular web application, so it's able to access the web application through that means too, making your site operable in terms of O for operable. So your site has to be operable in terms of I can access it through maybe my keyboard, my mouse, or maybe I'm using a particular assistive device for people who are disabled, and also in case we're using particular disabled device assistive technology that can assist. So it's important to also consider that. In terms of U for understandable, we have to consider the application has to be in a clear and concise language. Yes, when we know that we're trying to pass information out there to the users, we also have to consider that this language that we're putting it out in, it must be in a way that must be free of errors, free of complex grammar, in a way that the users are able to understand it totally and free, totally free and without any form of issues or complications. Okay, R for robust. In terms of making your site robust, it means it being compatible across all platforms, devices, browsers, because we can't really predict what browser our user will be using. We can't predict if the browser is going to use a particular browser, the user is going to use a particular browser or a particular platform to view your application. So you have to also put that in mind when building. So, because there are a wide range of technologies that we have to consider, so it's important that when building your web application, you consider it being robust. So these are the 4 important web accessibility principles we have to consider when building your application. How to build accessible view components, which was the initial topic. So it's not something that is totally out of the norms from a normal building process. It's just certain principles that we have to put into place when building our view components. So view components are little parts of your application little pieces that you put together. And it's important that when building your component, they have to be reusable. So in simpler terms, you when building your applications, you consider making your component not only reusable, but also making it accessible to be used by your users. So we have to consider, we're going to consider some important accessibility features that we have to put in place when building our Vue components. There are certain tips that you have to take in consideration when building them. So to start off with, we talk about setting the page title. Yeah, most people always tend to overlook this as not a priority to put in place, but it's very important that one considers this. The title gives a user the overview of the page. It tells your user what page am I on? Okay, I'm viewing this page. What page is what's this page? What's the title of the page? So it's important that when building your component and when or particularly your application, it's important that you consider that you're building, you have to have your title on each page. Yeah. Each page that the user navigates to has to have a title. And this could be done in Vue using the Vue Meta plugin. So the Vue Meta plugin was built by the community, virtually like the Vue community, and is made accessible for everyone to use in their Vue application. It can be done simply by you installing it to your application. So once we have the Vue Meta installed in our application, then you just have to add it to the application. Once it's added, we can then set each page, or most likely each component that we have, setting a title on each page for the meta content. Once we have the meta, we create a section for the meta content, and for each component that we have, a title is being set. We also add the meta tags in terms of your description and also other things that you can also add to give more explanation about that page to your user. Next, we consider specifying the text context language. In terms of this, it's more like we have to consider the fact that our user will not just only specify a particular language, not just English, not just Chinese, not just Hindi. It could be different forms of languages. So we have to consider that we have to firstly set the page language. Once this is set, we are able to make it possible for other users to navigate to their different languages. And how is this possible? When we set the HTML lang attributes, it is easy for screen readers to identify the text content language, and the language attribute already sets this, and this can be done in our index.html file in our Vue application by setting the language over in the HTML tag on top, just like the basic way of doing it in HTML. It can also be done in a similar way. If we tend to overlook this, or if we tend not to consider this, the screen reader uses the default language of the user and may not be able to translate if this was not set in your application. And this leads to the page using the default language, and the screen reader might not be able to pronounce the page text correctly. So this is us causing an issue or a hindrance to the particular user using the application. Next, we consider using landmarks to help users navigate to sections. So landmarks provide easy access to sections within a Vue app. So assistive technologies users, people who use assistive technologies can be able to navigate to each section of the application, skip over contents, go through each tabs in the particular order that we have set it to be. And in terms of considering landmarks, talk about using semantic HTML5 elements and also using accessible rich internet application, that's ARIA rules to consider. And here I have a table describing the basic or the important semantic HTMLs and ARIA rules that we have to consider when building applications. So we have the header, the navigation, semantic elements, all these are place class elements. We have the main, the footer, aside. Then we also have forms sections. So in terms where we have to also set the rows too, so we can also have on the table, we have the row set as a banner to display and heading, navigation for the main, for the content info for the footer part, and search form, and also for region, because we have different sections in our application. So also this has to be considered also. So using your headings in proper hierarchical order. So to structure our content for easy accessibility, your headings must follow proper hierarchical order from H1 potentially down to H6. H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. So when we are able to consider this, we're able to allow our users to tab through each sections progressively and not have anything scattered order. Next, we consider using adequate color contrast. Yes, most times our web applications tend to be, like say, just using anyhow designs and all. As when building products, we have to consider the fact that we want our users to see our products for like a good brand and all. So we have to consider placing each our content in a like right, I say a good UI for the user to see. So using an adequate color contrast is important that we ensure that the colors on our application have the adequate contrast. The contrast between the colors of the text and the background has to be distinct to make the content readable. Here's a quick example I have. On the first side, we're able to see the application a low contrast, there's a low emphasis. You can't really like deceit what's on the page, and it's very, very bad accessibility because the user won't be able to read at all. Then we also consider the other page, which has a high contrast, high emphasis, and good accessibility. So it's important that we have a contrast between both, between the text and the background. Next, we consider something that is quite general for all applications, using alternative text for images. This is very, very vital and must be considered at all times. So here, yeah, this is a quick example I was able to create. So considering an image, so this the image URL to part of the image. Then it's important that we have the alternative tag, the alternative attributes already placed with the proper description of your image, describing as much as you're able to of that particular image that you're displaying. It's important that you're able to tell the user, okay, this is what is on this particular image. This is not just done because we are just adding it, but they added this in terms of you, people who use screen readers or people who use other assistive technology so that I can be able to read what's on the image out in pronunciation. Next, we consider forms, creating accessible forms. Most times in building application, we always have to collect information from the user, maybe for feedbacks, maybe for in terms of filling your information. So we have to consider building forms in application. We can't just overlook that. And the forms that we build has to be accessible. Yes, so how can we make our forms accessible? How can we make it in a way that when it appears to the user can be able to navigate through properly? So firstly, we have to first of all consider we have to use semantic elements. Some of the form elements that we consider are using the form tag, the label tag, input tag, text area tag, yes, and the button tag. So we have to make sure we use semantic elements in building those forms. Another other ways to consider is using of labels. Yes, so using of labels. Most times you always tend to overlook this and just put only the input tag, and as for a particular form that we have, just only putting the input tag and forgetting that I have to put a label. A label is important. And also we also have to like add the four attributes. The input field for attributes must be the same as its ID for the input tag and the form for the label. The four attributes for the label, they must all have the same name. And this enables when the screen reader clicks on the particular form, clicks on the particular input tag, the user is able to touch on like the particular name that input was linked to. Next, we consider using of ARIA attributes. Like I mentioned earlier, ARIA, that's how I pronounce it, it means accessible rich internet applications. So this is an extension to the HTML syntax that passes extra information to assistive technologies. You can use the ARIA attribute to describe custom elements. There are cases where we have to like implement particular design and we're like considering, okay, how can I also make the user know this is what I was trying to build? So we are able to like use the ARIA attribute to also describe a particular feature that we're trying to do. So here I have a simple example. Yeah, so I was trying to implement a button, and according to the design I was working with, it had like an X tag for the button. So I thought about, okay, how can I like pass it out as information that this was trying to close a particular modal that I opened. So what I did was I set the area label to close, and also so then what the user will see is the close time. But in terms of technologies that are reading, in terms of like a screen reader reading this, the screen reader will be able to read out that, okay, this tab, this particular element was for close. So as you can see, that's what I was able to implement there. So next we consider using keyboard handlers. Yeah, what does this mean? So most times when we build, we're always considering, okay, the user is using just the mouse, or maybe it's just using like the screen, the scrolling tab and everything. We also have to consider, what if the user decides to navigate through my page through a keyboard? So for every mouse event handler, there must be a corresponding keyboard handler too. So we have to also consider that too. So this is important for the users who are able, who would rather navigate through your page or platform using the keyboard. So how can we consider this for a particular element? So here I have a button also. So in this button, I was considering, okay, what if the user wants to like submit my a particular form or submit a particular information? So how, if the user is planning to use the keyboard to do this, so I considered using the view directive, the key up, yeah, as implemented here. The key up, using the key up directive and also the dot enter, also to modifier the dot enter modifier. Then I also added the name of the event that we had, which was to display a message. Then, yeah, this was implemented as shown here. So once the user is able to like click on this, using the keyboard, using the mouse, all is going to work in the same manner and the same way. Next, we consider adding focus to elements. So people who use screen readers also use the keyboard to access their information. So we need to consider that fact. So you need to make your application keyboard accessible by making elements focusable. Yes, that sounded cliche. Like in terms of making it focus and making it focused. So each element on your application can also like have focus when the user is on that particular element, or when user is like at that particular page or particular point in your application. So giving your element focus works in different ways. So firstly, consider using of view refs. So the refs is from view and it enables us to focus elements in view. We're able to use the ref attribute, which enables you to directly access underlying DOM nodes. So this is not as complex as it sounds. So just like the normal way of using refs. So for example, I have a list here. So I added a ref attribute of the project's of the project list here. So whenever the user is like clicking through that particular list, maybe there are other items on the list. It could be different items on my list. So when user is clicking through it, for each item that they consider, there will always be a focus on them. So it's not just going to scroll, like it can't only keep that particular position, but that particular position will be considered for the user to also read through. The next, consider using tab index. This is used generally, not just in view, all of them, both view, building JavaScript and all, we can use tab index. It's the same way of setting it, adding the attribute of tab index. So now tab index comes in different values. For example, yeah, if you are given the value of 0, the elements can be focused via the keyboard. And also when the user is tabbing through the application, the user is able to like also pass through. The elements also flow in the proper tab flow. Then we also consider also what if the value of the tab index is -1, the elements won't be tabbed. So in terms of why you're considering where a user that particular content isn't to be considered, maybe like skip to a particular content that is not to be considered or doesn't have to be viewed. So just set tab index to -1. Values that are greater than 1 will always be considered in particular order that you set it to. So using tab index is also the same normal workflow, the same flow as we use in normal applications. So now we have considered some tips that you can or some features that you have to consider when building your application. Now it's also important that, okay, I built my application. What are the tools that I could use for testing accessibility? What are the tools that, okay, yes, I built my application, but I want to know, will the application be accessible by all? Will everyone be able to use my application? How well did I make my application accessible? So here I was able to list out some of the tools that we could consider for using the Chrome browser. Chrome browser already has it made accessible in your Chrome DevTools using the Lighthouse. Lighthouse can actually separate it out on separate components, or from the Chrome DevTools you could make accessible to it, or using the Web Accessibility Evaluation tool, Wave, can visit it from that site. Or also, Chrome also made it accessible and made it possible for screen readers to be used on browsers too. Then accessibility checklist. You can also checklist some of the content that your application will pass through. If you're, like I mentioned earlier, some of those tips, did you consider them? Were they properly set in your application? So you also have to consider that too. Then also there's also an accessibility auditing for Vue.js application. That's the Vue Axe is made all accessible for everyone to use to check your applications if they're accessible. Then, like I mentioned earlier, using a color contrast checker tool on WebAIM, which is also, the link is also set there. So you can be able to check it all out. So when your application is built, okay, it's important that you also know how accessible you have set your application. How accessible is your application to your users? So, with all that said, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Thank you all for joining my talk sections. Like I mentioned earlier, you could reach out to me on Twitter at Abiola _, or you can also check on my portfolio of my website at www.abiolaester.me. Yeah, where I share different content from time to time. In case you want to also find valuable content on accessibility, you can also check out that platform. So thank you all for listening. The gift shows there. Bye.